The loudest reaction is the weakest reaction. The person who screams loses. The person who waits, observing and calculating in silence, always wins. This is a fundamental truth I learned in the mountains of Afghanistan, with military intelligence, and it saved my life when war came into my own home. If you are watching this, feeling invisible or discarded by the people who were supposed to stand by your side, listen carefully. Do not let them see you bleed. Do not give them the satisfaction of your anger. Stay calm, gather ammunition, and prepare for retribution they will never see coming. My name is Harrison Maddox Vance. I am 46 to the outside world and to my wife. I am a mid-level, exceedingly boring compliance reviewer at Bay State Heritage Trust. They think my job is staring at spreadsheets, a man with no ambition who settled for a $60,000 salary. They do not know that before this desk job, I spent 12 years tracking terrorist financing networks for the Department of Defense. They do not know my boring job is a highly classified liaison position. I hunt the financial ghosts of cartels and oligarchs. I speak the language of money laundering fluently. I chose this quiet cover because I wanted to be a present father to my children, Coralie and Beckett. I traded the adrenaline of hunting monsters for a predictable life. I never expected the monster to walk into my kitchen. It started on a Wednesday morning at 6:38 a.m. I was sitting at the breakfast nook of our Beacon Hill brownstone, reviewing a highly classified suspicious activity report. My wife, Adrienne, 39 and recently promoted to Vice President of Operations at Mercer Ridge Capital Partners, walked in. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse I had never seen, smelling of expensive, sharp cologne. She walked with the stiff posture of someone who had practiced a brutal speech. "Harrison," she said, her voice icy. "I want a divorce." She stared, waiting for an explosion. She expected me to beg, to demand an explanation, to act weak. Instead, I slowly closed my laptop, looking up with chilling indifference. "Okay," I said. She blinked, thrown off balance. A flicker of genuine fear crossed her eyes. "That's it? You're not going to ask why?" "I know why," I replied evenly. "What does that mean, Harrison?" she demanded, her facade cracking. I tapped my laptop twice. "It means I have been doing my job, Adrienne, same as always," she scoffed. "Your job, right, staring at numbers." She turned, her expensive leather shoes clicking away, grabbed her travel mug, and left without looking back. I opened the laptop again. I didn't cry. I went back to the report, transaction reference 99 FUNMR. Mercer Ridge Capital Partners. I pulled out a cheap contractor's notebook and wrote, "She asked for the divorce today." To understand my calm, we must go back 4 months to a corporate dinner at the Mandarin Oriental. I was forced to attend in my 5-year-old suit. There I met her boss, Stafford Llewellyn Carrington. 60, built like a shark in a custom Brioni suit, 3 ex-wives, a private jet, and an ego requiring constant feeding. From the moment I shook his hand, he categorized me as a nobody. A loser whose wife was ripe for the taking. "Harrison, isn't it?" Stafford sneered, gripping my hand aggressively. "Adrienne tells me you work in compliance? Making sure commas are in the right place." "Something like that," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Fascinating," he mocked, turning his back. "Leaves the real work to the rest of us." Later, standing near the bar, I watched Stafford approach Adrienne. He stepped close, his hand sliding to rest on her lower back. It lingered. The fatal detail wasn't the touch. It was Adrienne's reaction. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it, offering a practiced smile. It was the muscle memory of a woman touched by him 100 times before. The world went silent. My chest tightened with betrayal. My instinct was to grab the billionaire and shatter his jaw. I wanted to drag him outside and remind him I broke men for a living. But I didn't move. Reaction is amateur, strategy is professional. If I made a scene, I would be the crazy husband. They would win, so I chose maximum destruction. I chose to wait. 3 days later, a suspicious transaction crossed my desk. The account belonged to Mercer Ridge. The stated purpose was investment fund consolidation. Using my federal clearances, I pulled deep-level routing histories. Money flowed out of a Cayman shell company, washed through Mercer Ridge, bounced to Luxembourg, and cycled back. Classic layering, a sophisticated money laundering operation. The man authorizing the transfers was Stafford Llewellyn Carrington. In the same week, he touched my wife and treated me like a joke. He was pushing illicit funds through my bank. He thought he was untouchable. He made one fatal mistake, bringing his crimes to my battlefield. Over the next 3 months, I began a shadow investigation. At work, I built a bulletproof paper trail, mapping the shell companies and filing formal suspicious activity reports, SARs, to the federal database, bypassing local interference. Simultaneously, I conducted a personal investigation. I became a ghost in my own house. I noted Adrian's late nights and weekend off-site retreats. I never raised my voice. Every time she made a passive-aggressive comment, I nodded and retreated to my study, recording the data in my cheap brown notebook. I was building a bomb. Then came late October. Adrienne was showering. Her phone buzzed on the counter with a message from SC. After the divorce is finalized, no more sneaking around. The firm needs you on paper. The Heritage Trust transactions can flow through your name once you're a clean party. It's cleaner that way. We'll finalize the structure tonight at the penthouse. Stafford wasn't just stealing my wife. He was grooming her as a scapegoat, using her signature to authorize fraudulent transfers and creating a legal firewall. She was blindly walking into a federal conspiracy. I photographed the screen and put her phone back exactly as I found it. Locking my study door, I sat in the dark. I picked up my phone and dialed Eldridge Fenway Pruitt, a former federal prosecutor and feared litigator. "Eldridge," I said, "this is Harrison Vance." "Harrison, still playing the quiet bank clerk?" "The clerk is done," I said, my voice cold. "I have a target, and I need to burn his world down." Eldridge Pruitt met me in his corner office on Federal Street at 8 o'clock that evening. He was 66 years old, a former federal prosecutor who had spent 9 years putting mob bosses and corrupt politicians in federal penitentiaries. He was the kind of lawyer other lawyers were quietly terrified of. We had worked together years ago on a high-level federal task force, back when I was still wearing a tactical vest instead of a cheap suit. He knew exactly what I was capable of. I walked into his office and dropped 2 thick manila folders on his mahogany conference table. The first folder contained the financial architecture of Stafford Carrington's money laundering syndicate. Every transaction, every offshore shell company, every hidden transfer, meticulously cross-referenced and verified. The second folder contained the personal intelligence. The dates, the times, the hotel receipts I had tracked down, and the photograph of the text message. Eldridge poured 2 glasses of scotch. He put on his reading glasses and opened the folders. He read in absolute silence for 45 minutes. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the Boston Harbor, waiting. Finally, Eldridge closed the folders. He took off his glasses and looked up at me. His face was grim, but there was a sharp, dangerous glint in his eyes. "Harrison," he said slowly, tracing his finger over the transaction logs. "Do you fully comprehend the magnitude of what you have built here? You haven't just handed me a divorce case. You've handed me a federal indictment wrapped in a bow." "I know exactly what it is," I replied, turning to face him. "Stafford Carrington is cleaning dirty money through my bank. And he's planning to use my wife to sign the authorizations once she's legally separated from me. He wants a patsy. I want him dismantled." Eldridge leaned back in his chair, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Stafford has been a phantom target for the FBI for 7 years. The Bureau knows he's moving illicit funds, but they could never penetrate his inner circle. His people never flip because he pays them too well, and he buries the evidence offshore. But you are the ultimate Trojan horse. You're inside the bank. You have direct access to the clearing system, and because of your security clearances, your testimony is unimpeachable." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "But there is a complication, tell me," I said. "If you confront Adrian now, if you file for divorce based on infidelity, or if Stafford even gets a whiff that you know about his operation, he will vanish," Eldridge explained, his voice turning deadly serious. "He will scrub the servers, liquidate his domestic assets, and move the entire syndicate to Dubai before the FBI can secure an arrest warrant. We will lose him, and your wife will be left holding the bag, completely unprotected." "What are you proposing?" I asked, though I already knew the tactical reality of the situation. Eldridge looked me dead in the eye. "I am proposing that you do absolutely nothing. You let her file for divorce. You play the role of the heartbroken, pathetic husband. You agree to whatever exorbitant settlement her shark of a lawyer demands. You let her win in public, in writing and on the legal record. For how long? I asked, my jaw tight. 9 months, Eldridge replied, his voice unyielding. That is the minimum time the federal government needs to secure the Title III wiretaps, trace the Cayman accounts, and build an ironclad RICO case. 9 months of you playing the fool. 9 months of letting Adrian strut around Boston, thinking she traded up for a billionaire. 9 months of Stafford believing he has completely humiliated you. He leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. And then, on the day of your final divorce hearing, when she walks into that courtroom expecting to sign her victory papers and secure her golden parachute, we drop the hammer, we unseal the federal indictment in open court. We take Stafford down right in front of her. I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I had operated deep undercover before. I had spent months in hostile territory, eating dirt and sleeping with one eye open, surrounded by enemies. But this was different. This meant sitting across the dinner table from a woman who despised me, knowing she was betraying our family, and smiling through the pain. It meant letting my children see me as a weak, defeated man. It meant swallowing glass every single day. If I do this, I said quietly, I lose my house. I lose primary custody temporarily. I look like a coward to everyone I know. Yes, Eldridge agreed without hesitation. You will lose everything on paper. But in warfare, Harrison, you sometimes have to abandon the perimeter to protect the stronghold. If you fight her now, you win a petty divorce and Stafford walks free. If you wait, you destroy the king. I thought about my daughter, Coralie, and how much she looked up to me. I thought about the sheer, suffocating arrogance of a man who believed he could touch another man's wife in public and steal his family simply because his bank account was larger. I looked at Eldridge, set up the meeting with the bureau. I'm in. 2 weeks later, Adrian formally filed for divorce. Her attorney was a ruthless corporate litigator named Sebastian Kelmscott. Unsurprisingly, Kelmscott also represented Stafford Carrington. They were keeping everything in-house, assuming I was too stupid to connect the dots. The divorce negotiations were brutal, designed to strip me of every asset and all my dignity. They demanded the Beacon Hill brownstone. I agreed. They demanded primary physical custody of the children, restricting me to every other weekend. I agreed. They demanded a significant portion of my retirement savings and a hefty monthly alimony payment. I signed the papers without a flinch. Sebastian Kelmscott looked at me across the mediation table with barely concealed disgust. He thought I was the most spineless client he had ever steamrolled. Adrian sat next to him, her posture rigid, her face an unreadable mask of cold satisfaction. She genuinely believed she had outsmarted me. On a cold Tuesday in November, I packed my life into a few cardboard boxes and moved out of the home I had built for my family. I rented a depressing, 2-bedroom apartment in a gritty section of the Fenway district. It had stained beige carpets, popcorn ceilings, and a view of a brick alleyway. It was exactly the kind of pathetic bachelor pad a defeated, middle-aged bank clerk was supposed to inhabit. Telling my children was the hardest mission I had ever undertaken. We sat in the living room of the brownstone, Adrian delivering a highly rehearsed speech about how this was best for everyone and how Daddy needs his own space. Coralie, who was too smart for her age, refused to look at me. Beckett just cried. Clinging to my leg, I sat there, my hands resting on my knees, unable to defend myself, unable to tell them that their father was fighting a silent war to protect them from a catastrophic future. The isolation that followed was agonizing. Beckett started calling me from Adrian's phone 3 nights a week, just to ask if I was eating dinner. He was 6 years old, and he was worried his father was starving in a lonely apartment. Every time I heard his small, trembling voice, I had to clench my fists so hard my fingernails dug into my palms. I lied and told him I was eating well, even though I was living on black coffee and cold rations, spending every waking hour coordinating with federal agents. Every 2 weeks, I met Eldridge and FBI Special Agent Quentin Aoki in a sterile, unmarked office building near the theater district. Aoki was a veteran of the financial crimes section, a man who spoke little and moved with lethal efficiency. By January, the trap was tightening. Aoki secured the Title III wiretap warrants on Stafford's personal devices. The recordings we pulled from those intercepts were sickening. We sat in the safe house, the audio playing through the secure speakers. It was Stafford and Adrian, dining at his private horse property in Lenox. The divorce is proceeding perfectly. Adrian's voice came through the speakers, laced with greedy anticipation. Harrison is rolling over on everything. He didn't even fight for the house. He's so utterly pathetic. Stafford chuckled, a rich, dark sound. I told you he was a peasant, my dear. He doesn't have the stomach for conflict. Once the decree is finalized next month, I'll have Kelmscott draft your new employment contract. We'll route the Heritage Trust consolidations through your signature. You'll be making 7 figures by the end of the year. And Harrison won't notice? Adrian asked. Harrison doesn't notice anything unless it's highlighted in yellow on his desk. Stafford mocked. He's a drone. Let him rot in his little apartment while we run the world. Aoki paused the recording. He looked at me, his expression neutral but his eyes assessing my reaction. She is actively soliciting participation in the conspiracy, Harrison. She is asking about her cut. She may not understand the full scope of the federal crimes, but she is a willing accomplice to the fraud. I know, I said, my voice eerily calm. The man who had loved Adrian was dead. He died the night of the corporate dinner. The man sitting in this safe house was a predator waiting for the perfect strike. Will she be indicted criminally? Unlikely, Aoki replied. The U.S. Attorney's Office views her as an unwitting facilitator. She's a pawn, but she is accepting illicit funds. The moment we arrest Carrington, every dollar she received from Mercer Ridge, every asset tied to her new position, will be seized under civil forfeiture laws. She will lose everything good, I stated flatly. Let her burn. By June, the operation was complete. The federal grand jury returned a sealed indictment against Stafford Llewellyn Carrington. 14 counts of money laundering, 5 counts of bank fraud, and 3 counts of operating a continuing criminal enterprise. It was a kill shot. The final divorce hearing was scheduled for Tuesday, July 23rd. The stage was set. The explosives were wired. All I had to do was walk into the courtroom and detonate them. Tuesday, July 23rd arrived with suffocating humidity. For 9 months, I had carried a heavy weight in silence. Today, I would finally drop it. In the cramped bathroom of my Fenway apartment, I stared at my reflection. I had intentionally lost 15 pounds, letting my face grow hollow. I put on the same charcoal gray suit Stafford had mocked, now hanging loosely on my frame. I looked defeated. I adjusted my tie, adrenaline humming in my veins. In my previous life, I extracted high-value targets under heavy fire. This was a different battlefield, but the enemy had walked directly into the kill zone. I arrived at Suffolk County Family Court at 8:42 a.m. I sat at the petitioner's table next to Eldridge Pruitt. Eldridge, impeccably dressed, gave me a curt nod. We were locked and loaded. Adrienne paraded in at 8:53 a.m. She wore a stunning Chanel sheath dress and diamond earrings, radiating untouchable wealth. She looked like a woman about to be crowned queen, walking past my table without a glance. She sat next to Sebastian Kelmscott, looking eager to wrap up the slaughter. 3 minutes later, Stafford Carrington walked in. He didn't need to be there for a family court proceeding, but his ego was massive. He came to gloat. He wanted to watch the man he despised be legally stripped of his home, children, and dignity. Wearing a bespoke navy suit, he sat directly behind Adrian. She offered him a conspiratorial smile. Stafford smirked back, glancing at me, slumped at the table. His smirk widened. He thought he was looking at a broken peasant, unaware he was staring at the architect of his destruction. All rise. The Honorable Judge Magdalena Truscott presiding, the bailiff announced. Judge Truscott, a formidable former federal prosecutor, took her seat. What Sebastian Kelmscott and Adrian didn't know was that Judge Truscott had been briefed by the DOJ 48 hours ago. She knew exactly what was about to happen. This is the final hearing for Vance versus Vance, Judge Truscott commanded. Counsel, are there any final matters before I sign this decree? Kelmscott immediately stood. Your Honor, the respondent has no further matters. We request the court sign the decree as drafted, allowing my client to move forward. He sat down, beaming. Adrian sighed contentedly, visualizing the brownstone and Mercer Ridge Capitol. Counsel, for the petitioner? Judge Truscott asked. I remained perfectly still. Eldridge Pruitt stood up, his presence imposing like a battleship. Your Honor, Eldridge's deep voice boomed, shattering the complacent silence. The petitioner has one final matter. We are filing an emergency motion. The room froze. Adrian stiffened, staring at Eldridge. Kelmscott shot up. Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. We received zero notice of any emergency motion. It is a bad faith delay tactic. Judge Truscott raised a hand, silencing him. I will hear the petitioner's motion before ruling. Proceed, Mr. Pruitt. Eldridge stepped forward, holding a sealed envelope. The petitioner respectfully requests this court take immediate judicial notice of a federal indictment unsealed at exactly 9:00 a.m. this morning in the United States District Court. Kelmscott frowned. Adrian looked lost. Stafford shifted uncomfortably. This federal indictment, Eldridge continued, locking eyes with the judge, is directly relevant to the financial disclosures and asset distribution in the fraudulent consent decree before this court. Eldridge handed the envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Truscott. In the heavy silence, she read the documents. Finally, she looked up, locking her eyes directly onto Stafford Carrington in the gallery. Stafford went rigid. The color drained from his face as the first flicker of panic ignited. Counsel, approach the bench, she ordered. As Eldridge and Kelmscott conferred with the judge, Adrian turned around. For the first time in 9 agonizing months, I dropped the facade. I straightened my posture and looked her directly in the eyes. The broken man was gone. The man looking back at her was the apex predator she had foolishly invited into her game. Realization hit her. Terror bloomed in her chest. Her hands trembled as she mouthed, "What did you do?" I didn't smile. I just held her gaze and watched her world begin to collapse. The attorneys stepped back. Kelmscott looked ready to vomit. Judge Truscott adjusted her microphone, her voice echoing off the back walls. This court takes official judicial notice that the United States Department of Justice has filed a criminal indictment against Mr. Stafford Llewellyn Carrington. A gasp echoed. Adrienne let out a choked sound. The indictment includes 14 counts of aggravated money laundering, 5 counts of federal bank fraud, and 3 counts of operating a continuing criminal enterprise. Total shock gripped the room. Stafford shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is an outrage. He stammered, his polished billionaire facade shattering. Mr. Carrington, Judge Truscott snapped, you are not a party to this proceeding. Sit down and remain silent, or I will hold you in contempt. Stafford didn't sit. Animalistic panic took over. He spun around, desperate to escape. He took 3 frantic steps toward the heavy wooden doors. But he never made it. The doors were violently shoved open from the outside. 4 men in Kevlar vests flooded in, led by FBI Special Agent Quentin Oki. The trap had snapped shut. The execution was flawless, and I had the best seat in the house to watch them burn. Stafford Llewellyn Carrington, Agent Aoki announced, his voice slicing through the chaos like a serrated blade. You are under arrest for federal money laundering, bank fraud, and racketeering. Put your hands behind your back now. Stafford froze, caught between the FBI agents and the heavy wooden doors. The arrogant billionaire, who had spent his life dictating terms to the world, was suddenly reduced to a trapped animal. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes wide and terrified, searching for Adrienne. He found her staring at him, her mouth hanging open, utterly paralyzed by the sheer velocity of the destruction. I demand to call my attorneys," Stafford stammered, his voice pathetic and thin. "You can call whoever you want from Federal Holding," Aoki replied coldly. "Hands behind your back, I will not ask again." Stafford slowly raised his arms. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoing in the silent courtroom was the sweetest sound I had heard in 9 months. The agents spun him around and marched him out into the hallway. The heavy doors swung shut behind them, sealing his fate. He was gone. The empire was dead. The silence that descended upon the courtroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of total devastation. Adrienne was still standing at the respondents' table. Her perfectly manicured hands gripped the edge of the wood, so hard her knuckles were bone-white. She slowly turned her head, looking at Sebastian Kelmscott. The high-priced lawyer was sweating profusely, frantically reading through the copy of the indictment Eldridge had handed him. "Sebastian," Adrienne whispered, her voice trembling so violently it cracked. "Sebastian, What is happening? What did they just do to Stafford? Kelmscott finally looked up at her, and the look of thinly veiled disgust he usually reserved for me was now directed entirely at her. "Mrs. Vance," Kelmscott said, his voice clipped and highly defensive. "We need to discuss this in private immediately. Your boss has just been arrested for operating a massive federal laundering syndicate. And the United States Attorney's Office has officially named you as a person of interest in the related civil forfeiture proceedings." Adrian stumbled back a step, as if she had been physically shoved. "A person of interest? Forfeiture? What does that mean? I didn't do anything." "It means," Eldridge Pruitt interjected, his deep voice carrying across the room, "that every single dollar you received from Mercer Ridge Capital Partners over your legitimate base salary, including your recent bonuses, the funds intended for this divorce settlement, and your anticipated future earnings are now classified as the proceeds of unlawful federal activity. The Department of Justice is seizing it all." Adrian's eyes darted wildly from Eldridge to me. The realization was hitting her in violent waves. The billionaire she had traded her family for was going to prison. The lucrative VP job was a criminal front. The money she thought she had secured was evaporating before her eyes. "Harrison," she gasped, her voice completely stripped of its former arrogance. She sounded small, panicked, desperate. "Harrison, please, you have to tell them. Tell them I didn't know. Tell them I'm just a VP of operations. I didn't answer her. I didn't offer her a single word of comfort, nor did I throw a single insult. I just looked at her with the cold, detached gaze of a soldier assessing a neutralized threat. I had warned her, in my own way I had given her a life. She had chosen greed. The consequences were entirely her own." "Mrs. Vance," Judge Truscott interrupted, cutting through Adrian's panic with judicial authority. "Given the federal arrest of your primary financial benefactor and the pending federal forfeiture actions against your own assets, do you wish to proceed with signing this final decree today? Or do you wish to request an immediate continuance?" Adrian couldn't speak. She was hyperventilating, staring blankly at the floor. The golden parachute she had been so eager to deploy had just been revealed as an anvil strapped to her chest. Sebastian Kelmscott answered for her, desperate to distance himself from the radioactive fallout. "Your Honor, given the catastrophic nature of these federal developments, the respondent aggressively moves for a 6-month continuance, pending a total review of the financial disclosures." "Granted," Judge Truscott ruled instantly, banging her gavel. "New hearing date set for January. We are adjourned." Eldridge began packing his briefcase. I stood up, buttoned my cheap, oversized jacket, and turned toward the aisle. "Harrison!" Adrian cried out, her voice echoing in the emptying courtroom. "Harrison, wait, please. What am I supposed to do?" I stopped at the end of the aisle. I turned my head just enough to look at her over my shoulder. "You should probably learn how to budget," I said quietly. Then I walked out of the courtroom, leaving her standing in the wreckage of the life she had destroyed. The fallout was absolute, brutal, and meticulously thorough. Stafford Carrington fought the federal charges with 3 of the most expensive white-collar defense teams in the country. It didn't matter. The paper trail I had built inside the bank was completely impenetrable. When the FBI squeezed his offshore contacts, the entire syndicate folded like a cheap card table. In February of the following year, Stafford accepted a plea deal to avoid dying in a federal penitentiary. He was sentenced to 16 years. They seized $104 million in illicit assets. The arrogant billionaire who had sneered at my suit was now wearing a state-issued orange jumpsuit, locked in a 6x8 cell in Pennsylvania. He has 14 years left. Adrian's destruction was slower, but equally complete. Because Stafford's assets were immediately frozen upon his arrest, the divorce settlement she had engineered collapsed entirely. By the time our divorce was actually finalized a year later, the financial landscape had reversed. Federal investigators proved she had accepted over $370,000 in fraudulent consulting fees from Mercer Ridge. She wasn't criminally indicted. They accepted that she was too ignorant to understand the full scope of the laundering, but they executed ruthless civil forfeiture. She lost the brownstone in Beacon Hill. The federal government seized it as part of the asset recovery. She lost her job when Mercer Ridge was dissolved by court order. The elite Boston social circles that had once courted her immediately blacklisted her. When the final decree was signed, her share of the remaining untainted marital assets was exactly $9,400. I, on the other hand, was granted primary physical custody of Coralie and Beckett. Because I had cooperated with a massive federal RICO investigation, my bank promoted me to chief compliance officer, tripling my salary. I didn't stay in the tiny Fenway apartment. I bought a quiet, beautiful house in Brookline. Exactly the kind of home I had always wanted before Adrian's greed demanded more. Coralie is 12 now. She understands more than she says. Sometime around her 11th birthday, she stopped looking at me with confusion and started looking at me with a quiet, profound respect. Beckett is 9. He doesn't call me to ask if I'm eating anymore because I cook dinner for us every single night. Adrian lives in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in Alston. She works as a receptionist at a dental clinic. She has supervised visitation with the kids during the school year. She is much quieter now. The sneering, arrogant woman who demanded a divorce on a Wednesday morning no longer exists. Eldridge Pruitt comes over for steaks and bourbon once a month. We don't talk about the case much anymore. We don't need to. The silence we endured for 9 months was enough. We live in a world that is obsessed with noise. People believe that if you want to win a fight, you have to scream the loudest, hit the hardest, and react the fastest. They believe that silence is a symptom of weakness. They believe that the person who doesn't fight back immediately is a coward. They are wrong. The most dangerous person on any battlefield, whether it's in the mountains of a war zone or the marble floors of a corporate bank, is the person who can endure a direct hit and simply smile back. The person who doesn't explode in rage, but instead goes home, opens a cheap notebook, and quietly begins dismantling their enemy's entire existence. Never let them see you bleed. Never give them the satisfaction of your panic. Document their mistakes. Build your strategy in the dark, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. By the time they realize you were fighting back, the war should already be over. If you are listening to this right now, and you are trapped in a situation where someone is actively underestimating you, where someone is treating you like a stepping stone for their own ego, hear this. Your silence is your ultimate weapon. Do not react, prepare. If you believe Harrison executed the perfect strategy, drop a 1 in the comments below. If you think he should have dragged Stafford out of that corporate dinner and handled it on the street, drop a 2. I want to know where you are watching from. Tell me your city and your country, because I read every single response. This story was rewritten and modernized from real case files to protect the identities of the innocent, bringing you a completely original, high-stakes narrative. If this hit home for you, hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the quietest people are often the most lethal. Subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications, and I will see you in the next one.